The question arises again, is this vision applicable only then to the inner life of the individual, or does it have some application to the outer world as well? The answer has already been addressed in a preliminary manner. We saw, when observing how to discern whether a dream or a vision has outer world implications, that since John was a major apostolic influence on the churches of Asia Minor, and since the subjective interpretation of the symbols did not appear to exhaust themselves in a personalistic explanation, an additional outer world application is appropriate. The question of either inner or outer is actually established on a false premises, one which perceives a split, an actual differentiation between the two. Our observation of both this vision and of human functioning specifically tells us that there is always an intimate relationship between the inner and the outer. It is the same as asking where the line between body and psyche is to be found. Such a line is essentially an arbitrary philosophical construction that has no true referent in reality. Body and soul, inner and outer, are merely relative references for the ego. What happens in one affects the other, but especially because there is a hierarchical relationship of psyche to anatomical, physiological functioning. What happens in the inner world of the psyche will have a more significant effect upon the outer world of body and cosmos, that the body will have actually upon the psyche. Therefore, it is not so much an outer world interpretation that concerns us, as it is the outer world is then subject to the same demands as the individual. Or, to say it more accurately, that the individual is subject to the same processes of the whole of creation. The process of spiritual development we observe in the individual is an inexorable one which demands our submission, one in which all of creation is caught up. Creation, being itself created good and continuing at minimum in a neutral manner, does not have the capacity to decide whether or not to follow the process, but must merely be obliged to be submitted to it. Human beings, however, have such a choice, to follow or not. To follow implies health, and so this process is presented in Scripture to ease the comprehension of the road to true destiny and health. To neglect or to actually reject the process is by definition then to fall into illness. Salvation, containing the word salve, to heal, is a healing guided by God through both scriptural directions and by God's own energy, also known as grace. We know from experience that human beings, both as individuals and as a community, have tended to reject the recommended process in favor of their own conceptions, and so have fallen into true chronic terminal illness and acute psychopathologies. Likewise, creation, bound by its relationship to human beings, groans, awaiting the redemption of the sons of men. With this in mind, we are able to observe both how this process occurs in the individual as a microcosm, as well as in the macrocosm of the creation. However, observing the process in the individual affords us a greater availability and more accessible understanding than if we were to attempt to study the creation as a whole. So we focus on an examination of the process within the individual as put forth in the vision given to John, in order that by means of the microcosmic activity, we may comprehend the macrocosmic implications. However, probably the most troubling and obvious manners in which this vision is observed in the outer world is through the actions of the person who does resist or reject this process. That person then entertains a type of functioning that brings destruction not only on themselves but upon others as well. As mentioned in the first lecture, this vision of John's is a dream of the wrath of God, yet a wrath we described last time as enveloped in mercy. What is seen in this vision, and what we have mostly been exploring, is the mercy of God exhibited in describing a way of health and wholeness, which, if followed, leads to the culmination of union with God. However, this path is bounded by wrath. It is as if one must keep to the clear path to avoid the briars that border each side. To leave the path is to enter into God's wrath. To remain on the path is to keep to mercy. Our main interest in this study is to understand John's vision, which appears to be illustrative of the productive journey of remaining on the path of mercy. Nevertheless, it is the manifestations of those who take to the briars that often dominate the reader's interest in this vision. For, like bad news that dominates our journalism, so negativity has a greater immediate pull on people's psyches. Possibly because the stimulation of the baser portions of our nervous system in the fight, flight, and freeze response is more immediately gratifying than the slower response of the pleasure centers and of endorphin release. Those that take to the briars enter into a form of psychopathology that damages many. The person who fails the transition demonstrated in the first seal, the white horse of conquest, never leaves that primitive narcissistic stage of development and continues to believe that the world is their oyster and attempts to control others and treats others only as tools to meet their own ends. If, perchance, they are able to grab hold of broader power, we would see the rise of another despotic individual, like another Napoleon, Hitler, Stalin, and the like. The only way to avoid such persons is either for all of us to stay to the clear path, or for enough of us to remain on that path that the ambitions of this despot would find no followers. However, history has proven this to be a fleeting dream. Or, take the person who succumbs to the red horse of the second seal. They remain in a state of infantile frustration, demanding that the world is unfair and that they are not receiving what they deserve. At this point in history, the United States is dominated by this infantile attitude, with the overwhelming victim mentality that is promoted. Already, we see how the process of John's dream is visited upon the outer world. It is not that God makes these events happen. It is the natural outcome of those that choose the wrath of God over the mercy of God. This was even more clearly accentuated when exploring the seven seals, as we notice that these events are natural occurrences, as they are called forth by the archetypal representatives of living creation, the four living beings around the throne of God. As it is our purpose at this point in the study it is not our purpose to pinpoint all the pathological outcomes of wrath, but to first understand the way of health. We will not, therefore, as of yet, focus on pathology in great detail. However, common sense can begin to tell us what such outcomes may be as we are observant of the process. For example, the third seal of avarice and greed, if not handled with virtue, was seen to produce starvation and economic collapse. The path of mercy will avoid such problems if only people will decide to walk it. We now move onward then to the next portion of John's vision. After he has described the opening of the final seal, his vision proceeds to another series of 7 events, each being called forth by an angel sounding a trumpet. Then I saw the 7 angels who stand before God, and the 7 trumpets were given to them. As we viewed the events occasioned by the opening of each seal, we noticed that the first 4 events were called forth by one of those archetypal creatures of the earth, one of the living beings around the throne of God. It would seem that the events under each of these 4 seals would then certainly be related to or the result of our animal nature. This we saw to be the case, as the events revealed in the seals indicated an aspect of the sensual and worldly life that must be encountered and dealt with by a practiced virtue. Here, with the trumpets, we notice that each event is called forth by an angel rather than one of the living beings. This would indicate to us that what is about to occur is the result of the actions of God and is a movement from deep within our inner lives. Angels, in objective terms, are the creatures of the heavens. And so activities and messages from angels originate in that invisible realm. In subjective terms, the image of an angel in a dream can be indicative of a message from a deep, inner aspect of our own nature, what is commonly called our spiritual nature or deep psyche. Objectively, the angels with which we are dealing at this point in the vision are the 7 angels of the presence. They are named in the book of Tobit as Uriel, Raphael, Raguel, Michael, Sariel, Gabriel, and Remiel. For our interpretation of this vision, it is of minor concern whether these angels are seen objectively as authentic angels or subjectively as symbolic of messengers from the deep part of the psyche. Because the point is the same. What is about to happen is not due to the control of the ego. Its origin is far beyond the ego. It may be a direct intervention of God, or it may be the grace and energy of God prompting our deeper true self to come to the assistance of our growth. This is further confirmed as the vision continues. And another angel came and stood at the altar with a golden censer, and he was given much incense to offer with the prayers of all the saints on the golden altar before the throne. And the smoke of the incense with the prayers of the saints rose before God from the hand of the angel. Then the angel took the censer and filled it with fire from the altar and threw it on the earth. And there were peals of thunder, rumblings, flashes of lightning, and an earthquake. what is about to occur is in response to the prayers of the saints and God's response to those prayers. On a community level, we can say that what will occur in objective creation is the result of the church's prayers, while on our subjective level, they are the response to our prayers and desire to advance in the knowledge of God and of the spiritual life. The appearance of an angel casting the contents of a censer upon the earth is also indicative of how this aspect of purification then is to be approached. The smoke of the incense as a form of sacrifice is said to carry the prayers of the supplicant to the presence of God. In that manner, it is prayer that is being cast on the earth, and it is in a prayerful state that such a process is to be developed. With the seals, we are given virtues to uphold. The act of such is intentional, one of will and discipline. It is disciplining the ego to conform to these worthy attitudes in order to prepare for the journey. Now, in the confrontation with the deep unconscious, the realm of the human spirit, willpower is peripheral. The former work of virtuous living is an active engagement, while what is now being countered demands a deliberate receptivity, one enacted through intentional meditation, prayer, and active imagination. It will be with such means that the work of the trumpets will be accomplished. The next image to confront us is that of the trumpets. Throughout history, trumpets have carried various connotations. They have sounded the alarm, awakened the hearers to a present danger. They have been used as a fanfare for the entrance of royalty, and they have been a summons to battle. What do our trumpets here indicate? Once more, we are called to be careful in the handling of dream material. These general meanings of trumpets all have validity, but our interest is in what is being communicated to John, to the meaning he will find most valid. To find the meaning of a dream image, it is often useful to utilize a form of association, an association exercise, if you will. The individual is asked to give his or her associations to an image. For example, in this case, we asked John for his first association to the image of trumpet. He may just say that it is a musical instrument. We then ask for another association until one seems more potent to John, the dreamer, than any other. You may think of this as holding the image within the hub of a wheel. Each association is then a spoke drawn out from the hub. Holding close to the image is important, as it prevents a common error of moving from association to tangential thinking. Tangential thinking might move along these lines. The image of trumpet is associated with musical instrument, and musical instrument is then associated with music lessons, which are further associated with failure or anxiety. Such a tangential method would act as if each association was the hub of a new wheel. This is a grave error, as in this case, our image of trumpet would be taken as a symbol or indicator of failure and stress, which, if true, would have only been arrived at by luck. We must recall, the dream or vision is attempting to communicate to the ego in the most accurate method at its disposal, which it is, remember, a story, or as we have indicated, a game of charades. Staying with the original image in the hub, when we are able to grow closer to what the meaning will be. Unfortunately, we cannot now ask John for his personal associations, but we can make some educated guesses at what at least some of these associations may have been. In addition to the general ones indicated above, those of alarm, fanfare, and summons, the trumpet would hold special significance to any Jew, especially the blowing of 7 trumpets. As we draw a line out from the image of trumpet in the hub, we also find thoughts of Jericho. John would have recalled that here was a city standing in the way of the people of God, a city that was preventing the people of God from gaining their place in the promised land. It was a tremendously strong city, whose walls could not be destroyed or gained by natural brute force. It was then, following the command of God, that the people marched around those walls 7 times, blowing their trumpets. On the 7th round, the walls fell, and the obstacle was removed. For point of illustration, let us say that we now ask John which of his many associations to trumpets carry then the most weight for him. Which of these was the most potent? I believe that we would not be far off if we were to say that he would have answered that the image of trumpet as blowing down the walls of Jericho was the most potent. So we have now established a preliminary understanding of the following events. They are events precipitated by God's own will and energy, the angels, working through our deep inner self with the purpose of removing further obstacles in our path toward union with God, toward consummation in and with God. Such an interpretation appears to be validated by the set of images that confront us next. The forces of destruction which fall upon 1/3 of all creation. Once again, we look to John, asking him for his associations to these images. Hail and fire mixed with blood, the sea water turning to blood, the fresh waters poisoned, the sun, the moon, and the stars darkened. Of course, his immediate association would be to the plagues inflicted upon Egypt during and prior to the Exodus. Each of these plagues, occasioned by the blowing of one of the 4 trumpets, again points to the removal of obstacles in the path to our destiny, the promised land of a new life and new creation. It is again an indication that this freeing would be accomplished by God's grace and not by our efforts. God dealt with Pharaoh, demanding the release of his people, and backed that demand by personally sending the plagues. Moses was merely an instrument to communicate God's desire to Pharaoh, but it was not Moses's or Aaron's magic at work, but God's energy. As we refer to the actual Pharaoh of the Exodus story, we can also observe a symbolic aspect of Pharaoh in this process. What may be dealt with in this portion of the journey is our own inner Pharaoh, that part of ourselves that contends against health and God. Freud may have called this thanatos, our death wish. It may also represent the internal representation of the devil within us. As was Pharaoh to the historical Hebrews, our inner Pharaoh may be much too strong for our ego to withstand, or our limited self-will to overcome. Willpower has always been highly overrated. Due to this, the energy to break free from this bondage must be supplied from one more powerful and deeper than this inner Pharaoh, the Imago Dei, energized by God.